So I didn't travel on many toll roads as I was crossing the States recently by car until I got into Ohio. Once I got into Ohio, I hit toll roads, I don't know, probably halfway across the state, maybe most of the state. The last one I was on for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I pulled up to the toll booth and gave the girl the ticket to pay my toll. And she says, that'll be $16.50, please. $16.50. I said, sorry, did I hear you right? How much was that? And she says, $16.50. It's like, okay. So I said to her after paying, I said, I only wanted to drive on the road, not buy it. She says, well, this is the last toll in Ohio. You're all set from here on in. So I drove down the road and I thought, I only was on there an hour and a half. I was thinking $16.50, and then I'm thinking, as you do, I could have bought lunch with that. I could have filled the car up halfway with that. And then I realized to myself, I thought, I chose to travel on that road. I was the one that chose to travel that toll road, and that I had to pay the price for traveling on that road. And everybody who travels on that road has to pay the price. Then I remember what Jesus said when it came to life. He says there's two roads in life that you can travel on. Just two. He says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Just two roads to travel on in life. There's a broad road and a narrow road. And everyone chooses on what road they're going to travel. And everyone has to pay the price for the road that they travel on. See, Jesus says this. He says, if you ride down the broad road, then you have to pay the price for traveling on the broad road. And what is the price to pay for traveling on the road to destruction? Well, it's destruction. But see, it's not only destruction when we leave this world, and it will be a serious consequences when we leave this world. It's destruction in life now. Today, there's destruction if we travel on that road. See, the road to destruction destroys you and I mentally, emotionally, physically. It tears us apart from the inside to the outside. But it doesn't only end there. If we travel down the road to destruction, it's not only going to destroy us internally and externally, physically, it's going to destroy our marriage. It's going to tear our marriage apart. It's going to tear our families apart. It's going to tear our friendships apart. It's going to tear your career apart. And anything, all of your innocent interests in life, your hobbies included, are all going to be torn apart and destroyed. See, that's what the road to destruction does. It destroys everything in your life and ultimately destroys you eternally. That's the price to pay for going down the broad road. And everybody pays it. Everyone, no exceptions. And the evidence for that, well, turn your television on. Just look at the world around you. Look at those who have said no to Christ. Look at a world that has said no to Jesus, that has turned their back on God. And look at the destruction globally and within this country, from state to state, across the board. Even down to your own family. There's been destruction. See, you see the evidence. And if you don't see the evidence around you, look in the mirror And you see the evidence looking back. The destruction that is wrought by turning our backs on God. But the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Jesus says there is a narrow road. Jesus says it's a difficult road. It's a road that few even find and few travel on. But it's not a road that leads to destruction. It's a road that leads to life. To life. That's what Jesus said. Two roads. One leads to destruction, which we have experienced in our lives, and the other leads to life. The life. But listen, the life that Christ is talking about is not what we think of when we think of leaving this earth, going to heaven when we die. We're not thinking about just life after this life, but life now. Life in this world. Life internally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically. That's the life that Jesus is talking about. This is what following him brings. It's life now, and it's life when we leave this world. But it's not only life for me. It's life for your family. It's life for your relationships. It's life in your marriage. It's life in your bigger community. It's life in the state. It's life in the nation. It's life in the world. That's what Jesus is talking about. There's life to be had on this narrow road. And it's greater and bigger than what happens after we die. But we have to keep in mind as well, there's a price to pay. There's a price to pay for walking and traveling down the narrow road. It's a price to pay, but the price that we pay is the cross of Christ. It involves the crucifixion. But it's important to keep in mind, we don't bear the cross of Christ that we might get life, but because we are on the narrow road. Because see, in the cross of Christ, in bearing up the cross that he bared, life is found. It's found in selfless suffering. The cross of Christ is not suffering for the sake of suffering. It's not that God likes to put the hurt on us so we can go to heaven when we die. That's nothing to do with Christianity. It's a lot to do with other religions, but it's nothing to do with Christianity. The cross of Christ is not suffering as some kind of payment to deity that we might get in the pearly gates. The suffering of the cross of Christ is the way to life. Walking in his footsteps is where life is found. And it's suffering with a point to it, a reason for it, a purpose behind it. This is what the cross of Christ is about. I've got 4 kids. At one time they were all babies and it seemed like yesterday. And how quickly it's gone by. I was in for every birth. Every baby that was born, I was there. The doctor, I'd heard a lot about it being a very painful experience, having kids. I was there for 4 births. I didn't feel a thing. I thought it was a piece of cake as far as I was concerned. I think it was a walk in the park. But it wasn't for my wife. It wasn't for the women when they have their kids. There was pain involved in that suffering. But when that baby arrived, when that little child came into the world, when that little glorious creation of God arrived, well, the pain was forgot about. The suffering that was gone through was in the past. There was rejoicing. And that's what the cross of Christ is about. It's about going through the cross of Christ experience, coming out the other end and having life. But now, in this world, and when this glorious thing is over, this period of time, well, life in all its fullness, when Christ comes, going to be realized. And that's what it means to walk on the narrow road. That's what it means when Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate. For broad is the road that leads to destruction, but the narrow road leads to life. When the Jews rebelled against the Romans, and they did on number of occasions, the Romans had a way of letting them know who was in charge. About 30, 40 years before Jesus came into the world, there was a rebellion of the Jews. They rose up against the Romans. After the Romans put them down, the Roman general ordered that the rebels be crucified. He crucified 2,000 of them in one go. And for the Romans, that was a walk in the park. That's what they did. They let the populace know who was running things. And their reason for crucifixion was they wanted to show what happens to those who don't bow the knee to Rome. They said, we're going to brutally murder you in the worst and most horrible fashion possible. That's what the Romans did. But it wasn't only that. They made a point with this. If you decided that you were above Rome, if you weren't going to live according to their laws, then they would lift you up. But they would lift you up on a cross. There's one instance where a Roman citizen, because it was such a horrendous death to be crucified, or Roman citizens were kind of exempt from crucifixion. One of the Caesars made an exception for this local official who wanted to get more power. So he pleaded with him. He says, look, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't murder me in this way because I'm above everybody else. So the Caesar did this. He had the cross made taller than all the other crosses. And he had it painted white. A special one for him. And he raised him up higher, above the rest of the common criminals when he murdered them. And the point was this. You want to rise up? You want to be taller? You want to be above everyone else? I'll do that for you. And I'll do it on a cross. And that's why they crucified Jesus. Remember, when they crucified Jesus, what did Pilate put up there? The King of the Jews. He was showing what happens when a king wants to rise up. They put him up on a cross. That's what they did to Christ. They said to him, you're bigger than this world. Your kingdom is not of this earth. That you've got a heavenly kingdom. Well, we'll put you up in the heavens. We'll hang you up there in the air. Between heaven and earth is what they did. But oh, how mistaken they were. Oh, how mistaken they were when they crucified Christ. See, the cross of Christ is the narrow road to life. And everyone who says no to this world, everyone who says, look, I'm not going to get involved with the gossip. I'm not going to get involved with the slander. I'm not going to be on Facebook running everybody down. Do you know what happens to you when you do that? Everybody gets on Facebook and runs you down. Right. That's what happens. When you don't get involved with ripping people off, when you say no to this world of scamming your friend or taking advantage of family members, do you know what you become? A target to be scammed, attacked, and ripped off. Because you've turned your back on this world. You said, I'm not going to get involved. And when you say you're going to be faithful to your wife or faithful to your husband, you become a target for adultery. Everybody's lining up. just to show that you're no better than everybody else. And when you tell the truth, how many lies are told about you? That's the way it is. Now, see, that's what they did to Christ. And saying yes to Christ is saying no to the world and the powers that be in the heavenly realms. And they say, oh, you want to be different? You don't want to be a gangster? You don't want to rip people off? You don't want to be a slanderer, a gossip, and a thief? Well, you're going to be lifted up amongst everybody else. Well, we'll crucify you. And the worst of all are the religious crucifiers. The ones who say you won't get in line with the doctrine. You're not going to be orthodox in your beliefs. You're not going to get behind whoever is the chosen leader of that time. Well, they're the ones that will hammer the nails into you. They're the worst of all. But see, there's a crucifixion. There's a cross to be borne in following Jesus. And anybody who comes along to you and has got a suit and tie on, or has a collar around their neck, or is carrying a big staff and's got a big pointy hat and tells you that you follow God and you're not going to suffer, they're liars. Liars to a man. And if they're women, they're liars too. And if they're a smiling husband and wife team standing before 25,000 people in a stadium telling them your best life is ahead of you, they're liars. Because Jesus didn't promise that. Jesus promised a cross. He said, take up your cross and follow me. Now, we can go down the broad road to destruction. We can believe all of the liars, but believe this, it's destruction you'll get. See, everybody who travels the toll roads pays their toll. Everybody pays the price because they chose to travel that road. But it doesn't have to be that way. And Christian, the reason you're suffering, and I know you're guilty as I'm guilty, but that's not why you're suffering. You're suffering because you've said yes to the cross. When you went into the waters of baptism, you said, I'm going to take up my cross. I'm going to follow Christ. I'm turning my back on this world. And all the suffering that comes to you, even in the midst of all of our failings, is all related to the cross. That's why we're suffering. Because we said yes to God. You said yes to living like Christ. You said yes to a life of love, not a life of hate. And the world we live in, they don't like love. Well, they like all that romance love that they talk about, all those warm, cuddly feelings, all of that romance and nonsense we get from soap operas, but not real love. This is how we know what love is. The Christ died for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. And Christian, you've said yes to that. You've taken up the cross. And this world system that we live in, it hates love and it hates life. It's a culture of death out there. Across the board. A culture of death on all levels. And its response to those who say no to death, who humble themselves and follow Christ, is to crucify them. But keep in mind, once again, bearing the cross is not the price we pay that we might be forgiven. When we went into the waters of baptism, put our trust in Jesus Christ crucified. When we went in there putting all of our hope in Him, He made a covenant relationship with us. We made an agreement with God, and in that agreement is forgiveness, is grace and abundance. And we have that. We're not going through what we're going through that we might be forgiven. We have been forgiven. And you say, well, it doesn't feel that way. He never promised that it would feel that way. He never promised that we would feel the grace. He never promised that we would have some kind of experience of his presence. He never said, follow me and you'll wake up every morning and you'll know that God is with you. He never said that. In fact, when he hung on the cross, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Feel forsaken, Christian? Well, you might well be hanging on the cross. Because that's the way he felt. Anybody that's peddling you that nonsense are liars. All of them. But you can choose to listen to them. Or you can listen to Jesus, to Christ. It's important for me to keep in mind that the options in life are two. It's a broad road or it's a narrow road. But it's important to keep in mind it's not the broad road of partying it up, of kicking back with their friends, of smoking blunts, hitting the crack pipe, making wadges of cash, sleeping with this one, that one, and the other, and going merrily on our way. Listen, that's the movies. It's not real life. Go into the streets and meet those people that are homeless. Go downtown Worcester and see all of those people begging by the side of the road. And I saw it all over the country. And it doesn't matter if it's in Colorado or Worcester or Washington State. That's a result of the broad road to destruction. So it's not a question between, do I go the broad road of ease or take up the cross of suffering? It's all suffering. The question is, do I take up the cross of Christ and suffer with a point and a purpose and a reason? But we can never forget this. Jesus hung on the cross, and we're called to hang on the cross too if we follow him. But it didn't end there. It didn't end with the cross. Because when they took him down and put him in the tomb, they went back on the third day and he's gone. He's risen from the dead. Through the cross, he conquered sin, Satan, and everything that wants to destroy you and I. And he rose up from the dead on the third day. And Christian, there's always resurrection with Christ. There's always the child that's born after the labor. And that doesn't mean just in the next world to come. That means now. Resurrection power is at work in you now. And if you're not in Christ, this is what he wants to do for you. He wants you to say yes to him, to follow him, that your suffering might be used for glorious purposes. That you might be made anew. That you might be made everything that you were meant to be when you were brought into the world. See, God has always known you. You weren't made for 70 or 80 years on this planet. You're made for eternity. And he doesn't have another one of you. And he's not making any more. And there was none before you came. You have eternal significance. Eternal importance. For goodness sake, there's 1 billion galaxies in the universe. More than that. You're rarer than a galaxy, according to Christ. And you've been made for a purpose, and it's not 70 or 80 years on this planet, it's for eternity. And this cross-centered life is to make you what you've always were made to be. But not that you might go into the ground and die and float around in some ethereal worship service for the rest of your days. Listen, if that's what it was, God save us from that. Christ came into the world to save us from church. He came into the world to say to the people who were enslaved by religious ritual and bowing down to this one and bowing down to that one and saying this over and over again and singing these hymns and making these sacrifices. Jesus came in to say, for goodness sake, I'm here to free you from that religious death. No. We're frying bigger fish than that. See, the resurrection that Christ offers is physical. That you might overcome death itself. That when your body goes into the ground, that you'll rise up as Jesus rose up. A transformed, immortal, eternal body fit for a new heaven and new earth. That's what we're talking about. That's at the end of bearing the cross. That's what he's calling you to, that you might beat death itself. Do you know the greatest minds in this planet are trying to do this at the moment? To beat death itself. The guy that owns Google, guy that owns Amazon, they're all ganging together, and do you know what they say they can do? Maybe 150 years. We might be able to keep you alive for 150 years. Jesus of Nazareth's already beaten death. And the offer for you is immortality. But you have a choice to make as well as I do. It's bear up under the cross of Christ and suffer with a purpose, overcome death, and receive immortality. Let's go down the broad road and watch your life fall to bit day by day. It's not going to get any better. It's not. The road to destruction leads to destruction. Jesus of Nazareth said that. Now you might decide, I'm going to bet against Jesus. Well, we'll see who comes out with the truth. Because when you look in the mirror, and I look in the mirror, and we're honest, we see the results of this road to destruction. But the good news is, it doesn't have to be that way. We can continue to follow down the road to life and receive life inwardly. Be rebuilt from the ground up within us. And see our marriages blessed. And see our family blessed. Not meaning that there'll be no suffering. But in the suffering there'll be a cross-centered power. And we'll experience resurrection power on a daily basis. But we still will go through the pain. But may the God of all grace, who called us to eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after you have suffered a little while, perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. Do you know the suffering you're going through, Christian? As you follow in the footsteps of Christ, it's not going to be forever. For a little while. Just for a little while. It's not going to be for the rest of your days. Can you go one more day? Can you bear up the cross one more day? Come on, I think you can do it. I think I can do one more day.
Sure.
What about a week? Can you follow in the footsteps of Jesus for another week?
Oh, yeah.
Sure you can. And I bet you could do a month.
Oh, yeah.
You've come this far. You've come this far. What about another year?
Yeah.
Because listen, it's only for a little while. Christ has said that to us through Peter, and we're going to put our hands on that and hold on to that truth until he comes. And this is the good news. In light of the glory revealed in the cross of Christ, we're going to choose today what road we travel. As we take this bread and this fruit of the vine, we're saying to Jesus, all right, one more day, one more week, one more month. And if you give us another year, we're going to follow. But this day, doesn't matter what happens in the future. Today, we're picking the narrow road. That's what we do. And we take this bread, we take this fruit of the vine, and we do this until he who is risen comes.